Okay, I'm here in Kiel, Germany. Today is a super exciting day. I am finally picking up a guitar that I've waited years for from the amazing luthier Dennis Tolz. He's also going to show us the workshop, and I'm going to interview him and ask him some questions about guitar building and his career as a luthier. So let's go check out the workshop. Okay, here we are. Okay, we're here in Dennis Tolz's workshop in Kiel, Germany. It's really an honor to be here, Dennis, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you about this. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, of course. Well, I wanted to start by asking about your concept of sound and how you developed it, because the character of your guitars is loved by many. And I just want to know where that comes from as far as your concept of sound. Were there historic instruments that you loved, or did you always feel like you had a sound in your head? So crafted over time? I just would like to start there with you.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So in the end, I think the concept of the sound is something that is super important for the luthier, because otherwise you don't have anything really that you're aiming for, right? So. Sure. You need to have ideally you need to have some idea or some ideal sound in your head. And for me, that really came from, listening to well, I was a player first before I was a maker. Obviously not a good player, but, well enough that I could judge the sound of a guitar. And so it kind of came from, listening to lots of recordings, not necessarily only of guitar, but also listening to piano music. And that kind of shaped like an ideal sound in my head when, listening to, guys like Julian Bream, but also like guys like David Russell and Manuel Barroeco, of course, at the time when I was still playing myself. And then I was very fortunate when I studied in the UK at Newark College, that we went and saw a collector's exhibition of like old guitars. So, we were able to look at and try to a certain extent, like, old Simplicio guitars and Friedrich guitars, and so some really very, very beautiful sounding and lovely instruments that kind of then all of those influences kind of came together into this ideal sound that, I'm never going to be able to reach, but it's something that, you can always like try to get closer and closer and closer with each guitar. And
well, you mentioned the piano-like sound, and of course, this recent innovation of yours that people can read more about on your website as well, this waveguide,
yes,
contributes a bit to this piano-like sound, I think. And but with the piano-like sound, I think sometimes it might go too far in the direction of piano, and
Absolutely.
Then something stops sounding like a guitar. But somehow you blended the two. And how did you come about that?
Well, you are absolutely right. Like, the guitar is still a guitar. It should still sound like a guitar. There are some qualities that I like in the sound of the piano when you, like, as I was saying before, when you hit the sustain pedal and you just, you hit the keys on the piano and you have all that kind of rich resonance and reverb kind of going on.
Right.
That is something that if you have a certain amount of that kind of very nice sustain and decay, like even long decay when you're playing chords, for example, that makes the sound to me a little bit sweeter, less dry. So even if you're playing in rooms that don't have like tons of reverb, you will still have quite a sweet tone. And if there's one thing that I really do not like that much, it's like guitars that are very kind of percussive and dry sounding. It's something that just my personal taste is just not going towards that.
Sure. So
piano-ness, if you want to call it that, is something that I could also call like a richer decay, for example, like that. I think just if I describe it as piano-ness, I think people are more likely to understand what I mean.
Sure.
In that sense, and so it's just not a dry sounding instrument basically,
right.
But a rich sounding instrument that I'm kind of looking for.
Makes sense. And it's kind of interesting to me to think about also the type of percussive sound that a piano has.
Yes.
It's this like non-aggressive
Yes.
percussive sound, but still percussive in a way, right?
Yeah, in a way. Yeah. Well, it's all, the same with guitar. It's like it's just, you get an impulse of energy, right? You hit the key on the pianos, the hammer is hitting the string. In the guitar, it's the same way, you hit the string with your nail, so it's just like one impulse, but then it's the question, how quick does that impulse develop into sound? It can either like, hit you like straight away with full force, like full amplitude straight away, like you would want in a flamenco guitar, for example. It really needs to be that percussive and fast that you can play those super fast scales and still distinguish between the separate notes.
Absolutely.
But that's something that to me for classical guitar doesn't fit so well, and it kind of gets a bit more tiring to my ears.
Yeah.
In a way, if listening to a guitar that sounds like that for longer, because it's not quite as sweet. Like if the tone starts a little quieter at first and then develops, I also think you have more possibilities in terms of shaping the color of the tone as well.
And yesterday we were talking a little bit about guitars, and maybe we should have saved that for for this part of our discussion that we filmed. But you use this word intimacy, which I thought was a really nice way to describe maybe exactly what you're saying now. This warmth, maybe is a little more abstract in a way, but everyone knows the feeling of like an intimate feeling with the guitar.
Yeah.
And maybe sometimes that's lost in like another style of making, which is, it's so present in your guitars.
No, thank you so much.
Well, stepping away from the sound for a moment and talking about the playability of the guitar, which is something that almost everyone points out. Like right when they pick up the guitar, they may not even played a note on it, and they're like, wow, this feels great. And of course, this all is, it grows as you play and notice how comfortable it is. I know from some previous conversations and talking with you that you've been able to develop the idea of the playability of your guitar with some very well-known, let's just say, customers of yours and people that play your guitars. Can you talk about a little bit of that process of working with David Russell?
Yeah, sure. So one of the first things, when I first had the chance to show a guitar to David and he tried the guitar, one of the first things he said, well, it's very hard to play. And I was like, oh, okay, that's not a good thing, obviously. So, we discussed quite a lot what it actually is that he thinks makes that guitar hard to play. And so being able to look at his guitar as well, at his Daman, and how he set it up and things, and being able to try that showed me like, okay, my guitar actually really is hard to play. And I had never really noticed it that much. So I started looking into, okay, what is it actually? What are the factors what am I missing here, right?
Sure.
And so there were things like, okay, the fret size. I used quite small, quite low frets, which means that in some cases you need to press a little harder to actually have that clean cut of the string so that the note resonates cleanly and freely.
Sure.
So it was that. Then generally, action is a very subjective thing, right? Like some players really need a very high action, some players can get away with a very, very low action. Right. But generally my action was too high. Sure. For a lot of people, and so there were then lots of different steps. So I looked into the actual shaping of the fingerboard. So in the end, the relief of the fingerboard, which is kind of the hollowing you put in it to give the strings a bit more clearance, was actually in a totally wrong position for where it should have been.
And that's not something that most players at least can see right away, like notice the curvature of the neck or something. Right?
Exactly, and it actually has to be, because there's this basic rule that you learn, well, roughly in the center of the neck, let's say between like the 5th and 7th fret, you should have like the deepest relief in the fretboard, which for some guitars might make sense, but my guitars are set up low, but what I mean by that is they have quite low resonances. So that actually correlates with where the relief in the fretboard has to be. So my relief was just totally in the wrong position, and therefore in order for it not to buzz, I had to have a kind of slightly higher action.
Sure. Which
I then moved the relief further up the fingerboard. Well, by up I mean down in terms of frequency.
Sure.
And that then meant that I could get the action even lower, or that I could get the action lower. That combined with taller frets and also a slightly adjusted neck shape. It wasn't so much the thickness, but David commented a bit on the shape as well. And so there were quite a few factors that I then started, utilizing which I then started, using or changing in the guitar.
Sure.
That then made the guitar a lot more playable or a lot easier to play.
Fantastic.
And so far people have been very positive about that. That now I usually give a guitar to a player, and one of the first comments is like, "Oh yeah, it's very nice and very easy to play." And it's what you said yesterday as well. You're like, "Oh man, this plays like butter, basically."
Yeah, perfect. Yeah,
and
exactly.
For me, it's such an important thing because, you don't want to sit on stage with an instrument that you have to fight. You want the instrument to help you, achieve the best sound that you can achieve, and makes no sense to have to work harder than necessary.
Exactly, and it is often a thing you hear from players, and sometimes when people come try guitars from my collection of instruments as well, that they'll say like, "Oh, I think I can get used to it though." And that's sometimes the wrong. Of course, sometimes people come from very different guitars and possibly guitars that are worse for them, but it should always be a feeling of like, wow, this is very easy.
Yeah. This, this kind of first feeling is like, it's like when putting on a new running shoe. You shouldn't be like, I might get used to it. It's like, it should feel kind of natural and nice to have the new running shoe, and it should be the same with the guitar. You should pick it up and you be like, this feels good. This is something that, of course, you always have to get used to a new instrument because it reacts differently to the instrument that you had before. But you shouldn't feel like, I might get used to it. You should have a much more positive feeling towards the new instrument.
Well, talking, we talked a little bit about your collaboration with artists, and of course, there's many more to talk about there. But I think something really interesting and unique about luthiers in Germany, and then perhaps even the previous place you lived, which was in Berlin, to now you're in Kiel, Germany. But is that there was it seemed like such a tight-knit connection between luthiers, and that you guys communicate a lot and share ideas. And was that formative in your guitars?
Big time.
Creation too. Yeah.
Big time. Probably even more formative. Well, no, not probably. Definitely even more formative than the collaboration with players, because they're probably just as important. But the thing is, and that's something that I really appreciate a lot, is that this kind of my generation of luthiers now, it's this small but global community somehow that really has a lot it's a lot of exchange in ideas and stuff. So most things have been done before, and a lot of things are not good ideas. And so why try the same that somebody else has already tried beforehand and said, well, it doesn't work, that's not a good idea. So if you have a colleague that is nice enough to share that information with you, that's worth quite a lot, because you don't have to make the same mistake again. And it's such a nice thing now with people also being able to do this over email and over video calls and stuff. And it's just that everybody speaks English nowadays, so I can communicate with luthiers from all over the world, and we meet at festivals, and we're always interested in trying each other's guitars, and so what did you bring this year? And that's really something that helped me a lot, because this is where you see the new stuff. This is where you see all the innovations. This is where you see this person brought a double top that is all wood. I've never done that. It sounds really interesting. Or this person does really thick sides now. It's okay, so what does that do? And it's nice if you know their instruments from previous years, so you also get kind of the comparison, and so you kind of learn from their journey as well.
How cool.
Yeah, and then those sharing of ideas and sometimes even collaborations, it's just nice, especially also because if you consider that luthiers usually sit all day or stand all day in their workshop just by themselves, listening to music or audiobooks, but not much else going on, in terms of socializing. So it's nice if you can collaborate with other luthiers as well.
That's so nice. Well, speaking of like little changes and noticing them over time, I want to ask you a different type of question. What is a change that you made in a guitar or that you noticed with guitars that you thought was going to be a small change but turned out to be very significant in the sound of the guitar?
Interesting question. I thought, so one thing I did, one parameter that is actually really quite interesting for guitar sound is the thickness of the ribs. So I'm using laminated ribs. It's a 2-layer laminate, but it's very thin. The total thickness is just 1.6 millimeters. So it's, you know, it's thinner than a lot of solid ribs.
Yeah, are you talking about the ribs on the back bracing?
Sorry, I mean the sides.
Oh, I see.
Sometimes they're called ribs.
Yeah,
in the UK.
You made me hungry.
So yeah. Where's the sauce?
Yeah, exactly.
No, I'm sorry. I mean the sides. So they are laminated sides.
Sure.
And so I went like not quite the Friedrich route. He had like really thickly laminated ribs, like 4 millimeters thick. I went to like almost 3 millimeters.
Sure.
And it had some interesting effects, but one effect it did have was it made the instrument sound very percussive compared to the instrument that didn't have the ribs. So I did the sides, sorry. So I made 2 guitars as similar as possible in terms of woods, etc. One had those laminated ribs that were like 3 millimeters thick, and the other ones were just my kind of normal 2 millimeter solid rosewood ribs.
Right.
I'm not going to call them sides. I keep calling
them
them
okay,
ribs.
That's fine.
and the difference really was that for me it lost so much of the sweetness in the tone, which probably was to do with the faster attack that I got. And I wouldn't have expected that change to be so drastic. Because, you know, a lot of people think, well, it's the top that does all the work and that what's the deciding factor for the sound, but it really isn't. It's how all the parts work together is what's the kind of deciding factor for the sound. So in the end, you know, I tried ending up with the best of both worlds. Having laminated ribs is for structural reasons very beneficial. Sure. Because you have the lamination, so it's a lot less likely to crack, for example. Right. And also when you're bending and then laminating, a lot of the times when you're bending, especially like thin ribs, they're gonna warp. So like, you know, across the width, they're gonna, you know, do this sort of thing. Sure, yeah. And if you then afterwards, if you laminate them, they go nice and flat afterwards again, and they keep the shape very well, so that when you are doing the assembly, you don't have to put a lot of tension in when you glue everything together, or basically hardly any tension in when you're gluing everything together, which is very beneficial acoustically. And so I wanted to keep that benefit of the lamination, but kind of have the flexibility of the solid 2 millimeter ribs. So that's why I then went the opposite route and still have the lamination, but at actually thinner thickness than the solid side. So I'm ending up at like 1.6, 1.7 millimeters now in total. And that for me, you know, with that construction now is hitting kind of a sweet spot. And and that's really, I wouldn't have, like, to come back to your question, I wouldn't have expected the change to be as drastic as it was. Sure,
makes total sense.
Yeah.
One thing that I found pretty interesting about your guitars is, one, I find that, you know, you always seem to be looking for new ideas and seeing if they work, and not really too tied down by some old tradition. But that you're also very careful and skeptical about implementing new ideas and when to do them, because just as of recently, you started doing raised fingerboards on the guitar. And one, I love that is on your guitars, but even the ones without it are still very comfortable. What made you decide to do raised fingerboards? Was there some sort of revelation that you had that made it work in your mind or with your guitars?
Well, not really. So basically, the demand was there. So people
Sure.
kept asking me, would you consider building a guitar with a raised fingerboard? And what I did previously was, I built the guitars in the Spanish tradition on a Solera, so with the neck integrated into the body of the guitar. But working with that method and having a fingerboard elevation, to me, it's not like a satisfactory construction, because you kind of have to graft a piece onto the neck that then leads onto the top, and I don't know, it just didn't feel right to me. Like that's not the way that I wanted to build the guitar. And I did some experiments also with where basically I simulated an elevated fingerboard with basically just kind of higher neck angle, putting like a fake fingerboard on top of another fingerboard, and
Sure.
to see what that does to the sound also. And it went into that more percussive direction again. And so I was like, I'm kind of hesitant to do this, because I'm not sure whether I'm going to stay true to the sound that I have in my head that we were talking about earlier. But the requests were coming, and of course there are tons of great guitars that have the elevated fingerboard. So I basically thought, okay, you know what, I'm going to go all in now, and I'm going to totally change the construction. I'm just not going to build in the Spanish tradition anymore, so not with the Solera. I'm going to have, build with a separate neck, separate body, so that way, the way I'm doing it now is that the neck and the elevation is actually all just one piece. There's no extra joint in there. It's just all one piece. It's all it's very sturdy, actually, the way that I'm doing it now. And it really, surprisingly, once I finished the first one like that, it didn't really make any difference at all to the sound.
Sure.
Which I was actually quite surprised by, and very actually pleasantly surprised. Like some people say, yeah, but it makes the guitars louder or whatever because of the higher break angle. Not my experience. I'm sure in some guitars that's the case, but with my guitars that wasn't the case. But it also didn't increase like the percussiveness of the tone, which I was very happy with. So now I have that, the nicely elevated fingerboard that also doesn't look weird to me anymore. The first guitar I made that way, I was just like, man, this looks so weird. I'm so not used to seeing so much wood above the top.
Sure. You look at it, you're like, oh, is the neck broken?
Yeah, no, it really, and the heel suddenly looks so long. But now, whenever I see one of my older guitars that doesn't have the neck elevation, I'm like, man, that heel looks so stumpy. Like, it's so weird. And so I'm totally used to it now, and I much prefer the way of making the guitars that way, because it's easier doing the varnishing when you have the box and the neck separately, because you can varnish them individually. You don't have to get into the corner there, which is always a pain.
Sure.
So I'm very happy having that now. But as you said, it took a while, after like requests for doing that for like, I don't know, 3 years or something like that.
Sure.
Took a while to actually get there, but I'm glad I got there in the end.
Yeah, right. Cool. Could you tell me a little bit about some of the inspiration of the aesthetics of your guitars? Like, for instance, your headstock of your instruments, which I think they've been the same for a very long time, or very close to the same.
Yes.
It's so minimal and yet distinctive.
Yeah.
And I was wondering how you came up with that design. And
well, there are actually very few places in the guitar that you can where you can like kind of express yourself in terms of like your own design.
Yeah.
Like, it's the rosette and it's the headstock, basically. These are the two things that kind of distinguish one guitar maker from another visually.
Sure.
And so I was doing what almost everyone does when they start out, is look at, what did the old Spanish guys do,
Sure.
and, borrow ideas from that.
Some
or
variation
actually,
of a Torres or
Yeah, so my first, I don't know, 10, 15 guitars were almost all of them had like this very nice Romanios crown.
Oh, nice.
But then at some point and at that time I actually still did mosaic rosettes and stuff as well.
Oh, okay.
But at some point I changed the mosaic rosette to this kind of more kind of just lines and kind of more less traditional, kind of more modern, cleaner look in a way, because my sound aesthetic also went into the direction of a more kind of modern sound aesthetic. And so I thought it's not really a good mix to have like this very, let's say, very traditionally Spanish looking instrument, but then it's a double top with like more of a modern sound profile. That didn't make sense to me.
Sure.
So I changed the rosette, and then I thought, yeah, okay, I quite like the rosette, but the headstock just doesn't fit it at all anymore. And so I sat there and drew lots of different shapes, and it's actually quite tricky to come up with something that hasn't been done, because the area it's not that big. So it's kind of you're kind of limited in what you can do. But I knew, okay, I wanted a more modern aesthetic, so kind of cleaner lines and less less stuff.
Sure.
But I also wanted to have still kind of the nod to like the old tradition. So I don't know if you realize, but if you're looking at the old Hauser or even Taurus head, it's like this, 2 radii and then the one kind of big one on the top.
Sure, yeah.
And it's kind of still
spots,
exactly.
And we'll
it's
get close up.
It's kind of still the same, right? So you have the 2 small ones and then the big one in the center. It's just in a totally different radii and therefore like a more modern aesthetic. And so I had the top part first, and it looked already, I was quite happy with it, but there was still something missing. And I used to do at that point, I had like the perfectly kind of half circle here that a lot of people still do, or most people do actually, that's just kind of a half circle here.
Right.
And once I changed that half circle to the radius that is there now, that more resembles this big radius here at the top, that then suddenly made all the difference. And I looked at the drawing, I thought, you know what, this is nice, I like that. I'm gonna try to make this into a guitar and see what it looks like. And then at first I had it for a few years. It was always ebony, but then I was still French polishing it.
Oh, okay.
And that was already, I was quite happy with that. And now for the past, 3 years maybe, I've just been like sanding it very finely and then oiling it.
Just like the bridges,
just
right?
Just like the bridge and like the fingerboard. So you kind of have this continuous kind of matte surface between the headstock, the fingerboard, and then down to the bridge.
Very cool.
Which for now I'm very happy with that aesthetic.
It's a very elegant look.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, moving past the headstock and the bridge, the elephant in the room, I guess, is the new rosette, which I believe this is the first guitar that you built with the new rosette, and
that's true
for me actually. So I'm very excited. But
no, I was I sent you the pictures before, and I was like, okay, so do you like it? Do you want me to use it? And I was very happy to hear that you actually did like it, and so I used it on your guitar, and I used the old rosette for probably 10 years plus.
Sure.
And there were always like minor adjustments to kind of make it even more minimalistic. And the last guitar before your guitar, when I was building it and when I was inlaying the rosette, I was kind of thinking, man, this it's kind of getting a little bit old now. Like I've looked at this for so long. It would be nice to do something new. And the technology that I'm using has progressed quite a bit. So I have a CNC machine, which is a computer-controlled router now, which gives just a lot more possibilities in terms of what kind of free shapes that you can do. And so I thought, let's just see and work with that. And I wanted to, I didn't want it to make it like look totally different. It should still I didn't want to change the whole style of the instrument. I wanted to keep kind of the basic style the same, So it had to fit into like the binding, the purfling with the headstock. So it had to fit with the rest of that.
Right.
So, and also with the waveguide, obviously, right? So this waveguide is this kind of shiny black thing in there. So, you know, it still had to be quite dark.
Right,
so
otherwise it contrast it.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
It would be just too obvious, and then I would have to find a new solution for the color of the waveguide or whatever, and I didn't want to do that. Plus, I quite like that light-dark contrast.
Right.
So,
well, plus the rosewood typically on the back is going to be dark from the viewer's perspective.
Yes, exactly.
So it's like it's hardly possible to be another color, right?
Exactly. And so, yeah, so I was kind of messing around with different ideas and you know, drawing up different things and holding lots of little pieces of veneer next to each other and thinking like, okay, so how does this look and how does that look? And you know, always showing it to my wife, and she's like, yeah, looks fine. And so, yeah, in the end, I found this, you know, this new design that has this kind of, still this kind of solid ebony ring in the center. That was the kind of central motif in my old rosettes as well. But it's got a little bit more color now because there's the Paduk lines are a little bit wider in it. So it's a little bit less black and white, so a little bit more color, which makes it just appear a little bit warmer. And then there is this kind of, you know, line pattern overlaying kind of flower. It's almost like a floral kind of pattern. I was actually inspired by a flower that I saw, which had like this really kind of very nice little leaves, like kind of in a circular pattern, like kind of all rotated towards each other. And so I saw that and I was like, oh man, this looks pretty. And so I kind of then started drawing like lots of different kind of line configurations for the central motif. And yeah, I'm quite happy with how that turned out now. So I think this is gonna stay, who knows, for the next 10 years or whatever.
Yeah, let's see.
And yeah, this is where it all started on that one.
Very cool. It's an honor to have this guitar. Want to say thank you so much for having me in your workshop here today.
My pleasure.
I get to take home a beautiful new guitar, so that's very exciting too. And thanks so much, Dennis.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm glad you like it.